I see you are also people of culture. Welcome, of course. That was, of course, Naruto music, only appropriate. And of course, I'm wearing a Japanese armor to suit the theme for today. So, welcome. You probably didn't miss me, and I probably didn't miss you either. But welcome to our first session on feudal Japan. Now, normally I would do this in class, but we'll be doing this remotely, of course. Hopefully, if you are live in class right now, then you're here to enjoy a bit of a show. Otherwise, if you are tuning in on demand, and hopefully this means something to you as well. So, welcome. We are going to go through feudal Japan. The slides, by the way, are on Classroom. I think some of you've already seen it before, but we'll go through it together right now. I'll explain a few things, and then you have the activity which you probably finished on Classroom. So, let's go through. I'll get the thing ready. Hopefully, it should work fine. And there's a full screen button here. I've learned the hard way. There is a full screen button. I didn't realize this first time around. So I'm a noob sometimes. But let's make this happen. Yeah, that button. Good. Okay. Wait, no. I want the other one. Hang on. I want that one. No. That one. No. All right. Let's try this again. Okay. Let's present. This is confusing to me. I know what I'm doing most of the time. Hang on, let me redo this. Okay, so I've got a few windows here. Let's make sure. Hang tight for a bit, guys. Just need to get the thing working. All right, let's present. You have too many windows. It gets a little tricky sometimes. What's that? Oh, doesn't matter too much. We'll make it work. Present. Ah, I see. Okay. All right. Well, I've got OBS running. I've also got this running. All right. Let's flip. No. Ah, doesn't matter. We'll make it work from here. Okay. Alright, let's hang tight for a bit here. That's weird. Alright, let me fix some tech problems. Yeah, we'll be back very shortly. Alright, I think we're live now, guys. Sorry about that. We should be good. If you are still here and I'm still live, then please type F in chat so I can follow along what's happening. Okay, that's a good sign. $1 mango. All right. Okay, let's make this happen, people. We'll make it about 20 minutes and then we can head off and enjoy ourselves. All right. So, what am I doing here? So, we are in Japan. So, let's talk about food Japan. Now, you've probably heard of this mostly through anime. That's a good thing, but you haven't heard of it before. This is the first primer. So, Japan at this time is mostly, I mean, we talk about medieval Europe and we talk about Japan as well. So these are kind of contemporary. It's kind of funny when we think about how we look at these things. We forget that these things are happening at the same time. Let's go on my headphones, sorry. They're happening at the same time. So while all this is happening in 500 to 1500 AD in Europe, in Japan at the same time period, same similar things are happening. Not exactly the same, but very similar things. And you'll find there are very similar things across both sides. So just to cover again what we did last time, when we did the Middle Ages, we covered these things. We learned that the Middle Ages was a European period, mostly, but we talk about the Middle Ages and feudalism in other systems. We are also focused on things like a hierarchy. We talked about the feudal system, how you have kings, lords, knights, and peasants, similar sort of thing in Japan. We also talked about the importance of religion in society, and we talked about different ways of fighting in warfare. And this particular topic is very violent, not very violent, but violent enough that you will enjoy it. So we are covering some military parts of Japanese history. Now, as you've probably guessed, the focus for this term is feudal Japan. The feudal Japan refers to Japan under the shogunate. So the shoguns, who were the rulers of Japan, covered this entire period, and there was a lot of distinct things about Japan. Many things you know about Japan in pop culture come from this time period. So there's a lot of wealthy things to learn about. Now, as a bit of a primer, and to risk being copyright struck right away, we're going to have a look at this clip from The Last Samurai. If you've seen The Last Samurai already, post them in chat. I'd be interested to see if you've seen this movie. We do show this in my movie subject, Film, Fact and Fiction in Year 9, which I highly recommend you watch. But if you haven't seen it, we'll do a quick clip from the movie, hopefully not get copyright struck, but you'll see what I mean by samurai.
Apparently he refuses to fight against Katsumoto. Cover down! Captain Aldrin! We are not here as combatants. Then who's gonna lead these men?
They're on officers, for Christ's sake. Let's move to the rear.
We'll be there presently. Fix bayonets! Fix bayonets!
Mr. Graham, you'll accompany me to the rear.
Yes, of course. Sergeant Gant, report to the rear and see to the disposition of the supply trains. Sergeant Gant, did you hear my order?
I did indeed, sir.
Good, then you will obey it. Now!
No disrespect intended, sir, but shove it up your ass.
Load!
Loud!
Samurai Khan.
You'll be fine, son. Assume firing position!
Assume firing position!
Fire on my order only!
That's a bit of a shame. There's the whole scene there, but that's probably all you need to see. So there's a bit of mystique around the samurai, and that's the main focus of our topic as feudal Japan is unraveling the mystique and uncovering perhaps what happened beforehand. So that is very briefly the samurai. That was an interesting little cut there, but there we go. Let's flip over to our next slide. And we'll move through it. So, what can we talk about in Japan? Okay, so in case you're wondering, those are flintlocks. Yes, they are. Okay, back to full screen. Here we go. Hang on. Full screen. Okay, that's fine. We'll do it this way. Should be working. Yeah, it's good enough. I don't care too much. All right, fine. Okay, so Japan. Alright, so there are a few things to think about when it comes to Japan. So talk about ancient Japan, alright? Modern Japan's one thing, but talk about modern Japan. Talk about modern Japan first. So most of you probably know about Japan. That shouldn't be surprising. Very big in pop culture today. Very modern, but the culture of Japan is very interesting. Now, when I spent some time in Japan years ago, I did a homestay with my school when I was in year 10. And a lot of people experience a culture shock with Japan. So when people go to Japan, they see a very formal, structured society. For one thing, the people there are very polite. But when we think about, like, for example, right now, we think about coronavirus and how different countries have handled it differently. Japan has been notable in how to approach coronavirus. And one thing is, the people in Japan they're almost unified in one spirit, right? That most of them will do the right thing without being told. I mean, this is a society where there's an earthquake, there's a giant hole in the ground, and it's fixed within like a day. Right, they completely rebuild everything in days. And with coronavirus, when the Japanese government decides to lock everything down, the population did so without complaining. Compare that to places like in Australia, where people are still going to the beaches, they're still going out partying. America, particularly bad example now, where people are like protesting so that they can open up businesses and gather together, even though the disease is still uncontrolled. Japan is very obedient, and this is the nature and structure of society. It's similar to many other Asian cultures, which you might relate to, but Japan is particularly obedient. So the culture is quite different. Now, when I went there, I was kind of like, yeah, I kind of get it. But for many Westerners who go to Japan, it's quite a shock because of how much society is built on politeness, and it has its roots in a lot of historical precedents. And of course, you probably know Japan from pop culture. J-pop used to be very popular. Not talking mostly Korean stuff, but J-pop was very popular in my time. And of course, those of us who those who read anime and watch manga. I see who's triggered. Okay, so what we've got here, basic map of Japan. In case you don't know where it is, and to be fair, some people don't know where Japan is. This may be tested later on, but there are some things you might want to find out. But yeah, Japan is here. It's next to China and Russia, and next to Korea, especially. Korea is the closest country, and China's next to it as well. Just letting you know, Japan is there. So, Japan has legendary creation myths, as of all things. Now, according to legend, Japan was founded by the sun goddess Amaterasu, worth remembering. And by the way, in case you're wondering, okay, why the Naruto music at the beginning? But basically, all of these Sharingan techniques are taken from the Japanese creation myths. So you have Amaterasu, you have Izanagi, you have Tsukuyomi. They're all from the creation myths. So Tsukuyomi, Izanagi, Amaterasu. There are 5 creation gods, basically, or deities. So very much directly taken from Japanese mythology. So not surprising there, but the names sound familiar, then they come from that. So Amaterasu is the sun goddess, Tsukuyomi is the moon god, That's where it comes from. Now, speaking of gods, one thing that's particularly prevalent in Japan is the notion that the emperor is a divine being. So the emperor isn't just the king. Actually, something to think about. I'm going to flip back to me for a moment here. Something to think about is when we talk about emperors, we think about European emperors as like king of kings. Emperors in Asian societies are a bit different. So when you have Chinese emperors or Japanese emperors, a Japanese or a Chinese emperor is a divine being. So they are gods. All right, people, they're not like gods, they are gods. Whereas in Europe, in medieval Europe, when kings say they've got like the right to rule by God, when God tells people, they tell people, I'm king because I have God's will, basically, it isn't the same thing. Whereas in Japan, the emperor is a god. Now, these days, they've changed the mindset due to historical events. The emperor is no longer divine, so it's no longer, they've lost godhood. But up until, say, the 1940s, very recently, the emperor was the same as a god. They weren't just descendant from gods, they are gods. Obviously, that's a kind of perception. They're human, but they have divine bloodline. And Japan's royal family is the oldest royal family in the world. They have an unbroken line for thousands of years, whereas other families in other places have changed over. Japan's royal family has been unbroken. They still have an emperor today, in case you didn't know that. So, where was I? Yep, so we talk about the structure of society. Now, of course, today's structure is a bit different, but back then they had a very similar feudal hierarchy, which we'll cover more detail a bit later. So you have the emperor at the very top. They are the divine being. They are God, basically. You have the warrior classes, the samurai, who were next, very highly regarded in Japanese society. Those who fight were, of course, top tier or second top tier. And then you have peasants, who, by the way, were not at the very bottom. It's as fun as it sounds. In Japanese culture, peasants were actually more respected than a different group of people. Again, we'll go through it next time. And because we look at Japanese culture, we look at language and religion, much of it borrowed from China. We know Japanese has 3 alphabets. They've got kanji, which is mostly Chinese characters, katakana, which is used for foreign words, and hiragana, which is used for Japanese language. So there are multiple alphabets, in case one wasn't enough for you. But Japan, being quite isolated at the time, basically developed its own identity after a while. Well, brief talk about religion. Like we said before, Japan borrowed Buddhism. It came from Korea initially, but they came via China. So they have their own sect or their own branch of Buddhism, but they also believe strongly in Shintoism. And Shinto is based on believing in kami, and kami is Japanese for gods, and there are many gods in Shintoism. And later on, the European traders brought over Christianity. Christianity is in Japan now, but they've always been a minority, and previously they were persecuted. So they weren't very popular in Japan. They were seen as a threat to Japanese values and beliefs. Perhaps not unfair either. Now, onto some of the really big parts. Something we'll talk about a lot is the shogun. All right, the shogun is like the big boss of Japan. The emperor was the official leader, but Japan wasn't one country. Something very important to keep in mind. Like the emperor controlled some things, but Japan was divided between many different families or clans, and each clan was led by a daimyo. So the daimyo was a warlord. They were the head of a clan or a big family, and each clan had their own land. So Japan was divided between many, many different families, and they often fought against each other. Now, the most powerful of these warlords was called the shogun. The shogun was effectively the military ruler of Japan, and in many cases, they had more power than the emperor. And in large parts of Japanese history, especially this period, the shogun was more powerful than the emperor. It's only later on the emperor finally restored power. A big part of all this is the samurai. This is something I'm sure many people know and are familiar with. They're probably, this is like the thing which, if you know nothing else, it's probably the samurai. So the samurai were the warrior class. There are many comparisons to European knights. There are similarities. They owned land. They were given titles by their lords. They served their lords. There were also major differences, and one of the things is the way they see themselves. The word samurai comes from the word to serve. And samurai, rather than make a pledge to a lord and then do whatever they want, they very much were born into service. Their entire lifestyle was around service to a lord. So they did nothing else but train to fight in warfare so that they would be the best soldiers for their lords. By the way, what you see on the right side here is actually a photograph. One of the really cool things with samurai history is that the samurai existed way up until the late 1700s and 1800s, which means that the first cameras were around. So this is a colorized photograph, and we actually do see actual samurai who were alive at this time. Whereas, when you talk about the European knights and armies, they're mostly paintings and illustrations. There are plenty of paintings for samurai, but we do have photographs. And we actually see here some of the weapons they use. They see the Yumi, which is the bow, very, very long one. That's something I haven't used myself, but I've held one, and I've seen one used, but I haven't shot one myself. The spear, or the yari, which is the long thing over here, and we have the katana, which surprisingly for many people, obviously in pop culture, in movies, in anime, the sword is the most important weapon, but in Battlefield, it's actually the bow and the spear. Swords are like backup weapons. So yeah, what we see as really cool isn't actually as cool. But the sword was a symbol of the samurai. And in fact, samurai were distinguished by carrying two swords. One long one, a katana, and one short one called the wakizashi. You can see over here, the one on the left, he's carrying two. It's one in his hand, one on his belt. And then you see over here, you can just see two, maybe not. But carrying two was a symbol. The sword was the way for the samurai to enforce their authority. So a samurai could take life. Like the sword was their license. So if they were walking in their fields and a peasant disrespected them, they were expected to execute the peasant. So the sword represents the power of life and death. And to carry a sword, to carry two swords, was a symbol of the samurai. Later on, the samurai were abolished. They were stripped of their swords, and that status symbol was a strong part of their identity. So that's part of the game there. Another big part of samurai culture is Bushido, and that is the way of the warrior. It's like how we have chivalry with European knights. With samurai, it's Bushido. So things like honor and death in battle were very highly distinguished. One thing that's important with, unique with Japanese culture or samurai culture, is that the idea of dying with honor was paramount. What that means is that you would rather die with honor than live in shame, because dying with honor or serving with honor would be like the ultimate sacrifice. You, your family, your descendants would be held in high esteem. If you were ashamed, if you were cowardly, then your descendants and your family would be shamed. So one of the things that's unique to Japanese culture is ritual suicide, or seppuku. So when Japanese samurai were faced with shame, like for example, they were defeated in battle, or they had a choice to surrender, they wouldn't surrender. They'll be given the chance to commit suicide. So if you lost and you were captured, then usually the enemy will say, look, you've lost. You can either be an embarrassment to your family, or you can take your own life with honor. And the idea is that they would cut themselves open, and they would see in their guts or their inner spirit if they were a good person. We'll cover more about this later, but the idea of death in Japanese society, in samurai times, was quite different. We'll fly through the rest in the last time we have. We'll talk a lot about war and conflict. So this particular period is very well known for its conflicts Like we said before, the daimyo and the clans fought against each other and tried to compete for more power and ultimately become shogun. Shogun, of course, was the most powerful position apart from the emperor. So being shogun meant you basically ruled Japan. The most famous period is called the Sengoku Jidai. They called the Warring State. That was the most violent part of Japanese history, where most of the clans are fighting against each other. Most of the movies, the samurai movies you see, are set in this time or just afterwards. Again, a lot of anime, for example, Rurouni Kenshin, is set just after the Sengoku Jidai. A lot of pop culture and games are set during this time. So it's one of the most romanticized periods of Japanese history for many reasons. Many legends, many heroes, many movies are set in the Sengoku Jidai, and that's mostly based on this period. Now, Japan didn't just fight against itself, it was actually quite isolated. So after the Sengoku Jidai, Japan became isolated. So the shoguns under the Tokugawa, they controlled who went in and out, and they mostly didn't want people coming into Japan. They didn't want foreigners bringing strange religions and different technology and different ideas into Japanese society. So they banned all trade except for I think 2 ports. The Portuguese were allowed two places to trade, but for the most part there was no trade in Japan for about 200 years. The problem with this was that while Japan was isolated, the rest of the world advanced. So 200 years later, the Americans turned up with like metal ships. I want you to think about this, right? Think about this picture over here. Now, Japan at this time had like these giant wooden ships. They're like floating castles. And out of nowhere, you get these metal ships with engines, right? Why would you put a fire on a ship? Well, they did, and the fire makes the ship go. Think about that. And by the way, they're for cannons, right? I mean, Japan had guns for quite a while, like simple flintlock muskets. But the after about 100 years, the Westerners, the Americans, and the other European powers had battleships, basically. So suddenly, you have this trade opportunity. And by trade opportunity, I mean, if you don't trade with us, we're going to shoot you with cannons. And I believe the story goes that Commodore Perry, who was in charge of the American ships, he basically went to Japan. They said, trade it with us. And to demonstrate this, they shot cannons into the ocean, into the harbour. And what did the Japanese have? Bows, swords, wooden boats against guns and battleships? They were no good matchup. So Japan did have to force itself open and start trading with the West. And because of this, Japan started to become quite modern. So that's our overview. And some of the focus questions we have here are these things. How was Japan structured under the shoguns? Why was the warrior class, the samurai, so highly regarded? And how did the shoguns gain and lose power? And that's our overview. So hopefully that makes some sense to you. So if you haven't already, what I'd like you to do for our next bit of work is to go through that sheet that we have to find out some of the terminology and facts about Japan. That's on the classroom there. Should be fairly quick to do. You can use your textbook or you can use Google and search it up. But hopefully you can have a bit of a primer. We'll revisit these terms later on, but by looking at what they mean, it will help you access new things later on. Anyway, I hope this makes sense to you. Hope you enjoyed yourself. I am not New Sensei, I'm Mr. Nguyen, and hopefully I'll see you next time. God, that's weird.